I worked at a mid-sized marketing firm for about 8 months. Standard corporate job, open floor plan, break room with stale coffee, colorful conference rooms numbered 1 through 6. Everyone called conference room 3 by a nickname though, the Cave, because it didn't have any windows. My team had weekly status meetings there. Wednesdays at 2 p.m. scheduled for 1 hour. The meetings always ended early. Not like someone would wrap things up and we'd leave. More like, at the 53-minute mark, everyone would just stop talking mid-sentence and start packing up their things. No acknowledgement that we were cutting it short. No transition. People would just close their laptops, grab their notebooks, and file out. I noticed it the 3rd week. We'd been discussing a campaign timeline, and my manager was mid-sentence, literally mid-word, when she just stopped, closed her laptop, stood up. Everyone else did the same, like they'd all heard a signal I couldn't hear. I looked at my phone. We'd been in there for 53 minutes. I said something like, "We still have 7 minutes if anyone wants to finish the discussion." My manager looked at me confused and said the meeting was over, we'd covered everything. Everyone nodded and left, but we hadn't covered everything. She'd been in the middle of explaining a deadline. I stayed behind for a minute looking at the room. Nothing seemed off about it. Standard conference room. Table, chairs, whiteboard, speakerphone in the center. The next week, same thing happened. Exactly 53 minutes in, everyone stopped mid-conversation and left. I started paying closer attention. It wasn't just our meeting. I'd walk past conference room 3 throughout the week and see other teams meeting in there. I started noting the times. Every meeting in that room ended at the 53-minute mark. Different teams, different managers, different purposes. Didn't matter. 53 minutes. Everyone would stand up and leave, often mid-discussion. I checked the calendar system to see if there was some kind of automated reminder. Nothing. All the meetings were scheduled for a full hour. I asked Justin, my coworker, about it after one of our meetings. He seemed genuinely confused and said he didn't know what I was talking about. Said our meetings ran the full hour and we always finished our agenda. I pulled up my notes. Every Wednesday for 6 weeks, I'd marked the exact moment people started leaving. Every single time, 53 minutes. He looked at my notes and dismissed it by saying maybe my phone's clock was off. But I knew it wasn't. The following Wednesday, I set a timer on my phone at the start of the meeting. I put the phone face down on the table so I wouldn't be staring at it. The meeting proceeded normally. Project updates, deadline discussions, the usual. Then right on the clock, my manager stopped mid-sentence. Everyone immediately started packing up. I checked my timer. 53 minutes, 8 seconds. I asked if anyone else noticed we'd just stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. My manager looked at me blankly and said no. We'd wrapped up naturally. Everyone else nodded in agreement, preparing to leave, almost in a hurry. But I'd watched it happen. She'd literally stopped mid-word. Over the next few weeks, I started digging. I went through the calendar system archives, every meeting booked in this conference room since the company moved into this building 7 years ago. I spot-checked about 50 meetings across different years. Every single 1-hour meeting had notes or follow-up emails time-stamped at exactly 53 minutes. I brought this up to IT. The guy looked at me like I was paranoid and said there was no automated system forcing meetings to end. I asked if he'd ever been in a meeting in conference room 3. He said yeah, a few times. I asked if he noticed anything strange. He thought for a second and said no, but he always felt exhausted afterward, like he'd been in there for 3 hours instead of 1. That's when I realized everyone felt it, that drained, dazed feeling after meetings in that room. But nobody connected it to anything. So I decided to stay past the 53-minute mark during our next meeting. When everyone stood up at the usual time, I said I needed to stay and finish some notes. My manager said okay. Everyone left and I remained alone in conference room 3. 7 minutes left in the hour. At first, nothing happened. I was watching closely the clock on my phone. At the 55-minute mark, I started feeling wrong. Pressure building behind my eyes, a tightness in my chest. At 57 minutes, I heard a low hum. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the table, the air itself. At 59 minutes, the pressure in my head became intense, like being underwater. At 60 minutes exactly, everything stopped. The hum cut off, the pressure vanished. I sat there for a moment, then stood up and left. When I opened the door, my manager was standing in the hallway with 2 other coworkers. They all looked panicked. My manager grabbed my arm and asked where I'd been. I said I'd been in the conference room. I'd told her I was staying to finish notes. She said that was 3 hours ago. I checked my phone. 5:07 p.m. I'd gone into the meeting at 2 p.m. It should have been 3 p.m. Instead, 3 hours had passed. I had 23 missed calls, dozens of texts, all sent over the past 3 hours, asking where I was, if I was okay, if I'd left the building. My manager said she'd checked conference room 3 multiple times. It had been empty. She'd even gone inside and looked around. But I'd been sitting there. I'd only experienced 7 minutes. I told her I didn't know what happened. That from my perspective, I'd only stayed 7 minutes after everyone left. She looked at me for a long moment, then said maybe I'd fallen asleep and lost track of time. But I knew I hadn't. I requested to have our meetings moved to a different room. Said the lack of windows in conference room 3 made me feel claustrophobic. My manager agreed immediately. She seemed relieved. We've been meeting in conference room 5 for 2 months now. The meetings run the full hour. People finish their sentences. Nobody leaves looking dazed. But I still see other teams booking conference room 3. Sometimes I check the clock. Every meeting ends at 53 minutes. Nobody ever stays past that, except me that one time, and I'm never doing it again. The year I was saving up to move out of my parents' house, I took a seasonal job at a big home goods store whose name I won't say. It was one of those massive places in a retail park off the motorway, a giant beige box that smelled aggressively of vanilla and cinnamon from the moment you walked in. During the day, it was a special kind of suburban chaos. At night, it was something else entirely. My job was simple. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., when the store was locked and silent, I was part of a small team doing a full inventory count of the stockroom. The crew was small, just 4 of us and a supervisor, and we rarely spoke. It was a solitary job done in shared company. The stockroom itself was a cavernous space, probably bigger than the showroom floor, with concrete floors and towering metal shelves that created a dense, confusing maze. The lighting was terrible. Just long fluorescent tubes that hummed and cast a sickly yellow-green glow, leaving deep shadows in the corners. You could get properly lost back there. But the pay was good, and honestly, I preferred the quiet hum of the building's machinery to the forced chatter of customer service. I'd just grab my scanner and disappear into the aisles for hours. My first few shifts were exactly what I expected. Boring, repetitive, and physically tiring. Just scanning barcodes and counting boxes. About a week in, I was working deep in the back, in an aisle labeled seasonal decor, counting boxes of ridiculously fragile glass ornaments. It was around 3 a.m., that weird dead hour when you feel completely disconnected from the normal rhythm of the world. The air was still and cool, and I heard a sound. It was a very faint musical chime, like from a baby's mobile or a cheap music box. It played a simple little lullaby, maybe 10 or 15 seconds long, and then stopped, leaving the silence feeling even heavier. I took off my headphones and listened. Nothing. I figured a toy in one of the thousands of boxes must have been jostled and set off. It was a little weird, but in a room full of products with batteries, it made a strange kind of sense. I shrugged it off and kept counting. The next night I heard it again. Same time, almost to the minute. Same tinny lullaby. This time I was sure it came from the kids in nursery aisle, a few rows over from where I was working in kitchenware. I was on my break anyway, so I decided to walk over and check it out, thinking I could find the box and maybe muffle it or turn it off. The moment I turned into the aisle, the sound stopped. The sudden silence was jarring. I looked around, scanning the shelves packed with boxes of cribs, rattles, and stuffed animals, but everything was still. On the way back to my station, I passed through bed and bath and noticed something that struck me as odd. A tall shelf of bath towels, which I remembered being a complete mess earlier, was now perfect. They were folded into flawless rectangles and arranged in a color gradient, from a soft ivory to a deep navy blue. I just figured one of the managers, maybe my supervisor Dave, was a perfectionist and had tidied it while doing his rounds. This became the pattern of my nights. Around 3 a.m., the lullaby would play from somewhere in the nursery aisle. It never moved. It was always from that same spot. And a little while later, I'd discover a section of the stockroom that had been mysteriously, impeccably organized. One night, it was a jumbled display of wine glasses, all polished and arranged by size in perfect rows. Another night, a whole pallet of mismatched throw pillows was sorted by fabric and color, stacked in neat cubes. No one on the small night crew ever took credit for it. When I casually asked Dave about it, he just gave me a flat look and grunted something about getting back to work. He didn't seem surprised, just unwilling to talk about it. One night, I was tasked with the kids in nursery aisle myself. I'd been avoiding it, but it was on my list and I couldn't put it off. I was scanning boxes of baby blankets, feeling a tight knot of anxiety in my stomach, just waiting for the inevitable chime. The silence stretched on past 3:15 a.m., and I started to relax, thinking for some reason it wouldn't happen if I was right there. But I was wrong. It wasn't faint or distant this time. It was loud and startlingly clear, coming from the other side of the shelf I was leaning against. The little lullaby played its full, cheerful, tinny tune. I froze, my hand hovering over a barcode. I could hear the faint mechanical whirring of the music box inside whatever toy it was. When the song ended, the silence was broken by another sound. A soft, rhythmic thumps. It was the unmistakable sound of small plastic blocks being neatly stacked on top of one another with precision. I crouched down and peered through a small gap between two boxes of rattles. I couldn't see anything in the dimly lit aisle, just the shapes of boxes and shelves. But I could hear it, not more than 5 feet away from me. Something was there, in the dark, patiently organizing the chaos. I didn't make a sound. I just slowly, carefully backed away. I left the aisle, went to the complete opposite end of the stockroom, and counted boxes of cutlery for the rest of my shift, my ears straining with every little creak of the building. I always avoided the nursery aisle. I started to notice that the permanent, year-round employees always left a portable radio playing on a central shelf, all night long, tuned to a staticky talk radio station. I had assumed it was for company. Now I think it was to drown out other sounds. I finished my 2-month contract, took my money, and went on with my life. I still don't know what was happening there, but whatever it was, it really, really liked things to be tidy. For about a year, I worked as a line cook at a local diner that had been around since the 60s and probably hadn't been updated since. It was one of those classic places with cracked red vinyl booths, a long Formica countertop, worn smooth by countless elbows, and enough chrome to blind you when the afternoon sun hit it right. Most of the kitchen equipment was ancient, but built like a tank. My job was working the grill on the evening shift. Because I was reliable and didn't mind being alone, I was one of the few people the owner, a tough but fair woman named Carol, trusted to close up the kitchen by myself. This meant staying about an hour after we locked the doors at midnight to scrub everything down, the air thick with the smell of bleach and old grease. Closing the kitchen is a process of shutting down the noise. The shouting of orders stops. The clatter of plates and pans fades. The violent hiss of the flat-top grill dies out. The constant shouting, the clatter of pans, the roar of the exhaust fans, it all dies down, one by one. And when that last fan switches off, this heavy, ringing silence just drops. It was in that silence that the building's real sounds came out. The hum of the walk-in freezer, the groan of old pipes. The first time I closed alone, I followed the checklist taped to the cooler door exactly. Grills off and scraped, fryers drained, all the computer terminals for orders properly powered down. I was mopping the checkered floors when I was startled by a loud, violent noise. It was the harsh, mechanical grinding of the old dot matrix printer we used for kitchen tickets. It sounded like a dying insect. It was impossible. The whole point of sale system was shut off. I walked over and looked at the paper. It was just a single line of garbled characters, nonsense symbols. I figured it was just an electrical glitch, a final spasm from a machine that was older than I was. I tore it off, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the trash. It happened again on my next closing shift. Same time, around 12:45 a.m., long after everything was dark and quiet. The sound was somehow more aggressive in the silence I'd come to expect. I went over to the printer with a growing sense of unease. This time, the ticket wasn't garbled. It was perfectly, clearly printed, in that classic blocky font. 2 words, black coffee. I just stood there for a minute, looking at it. I went and physically unplugged the cable connecting the printer to the main terminal. It made no sense. I checked the power cord in the wall. It was snug. The terminal screen was black. There was no rational reason for it to have printed. It just became this thing that happened. Every night I closed, at almost the exact same time, that printer would roar to life and spit out the same ticket, black coffee. It was creepy, but it was so predictable that I kind of got used to it. I stopped throwing the tickets out. I don't know why, but I started just tearing them off and sticking them on the little metal clip on the pass-through shelf, where we put the food up for the servers. It just felt like the right thing to do, like I was supposed to. So one Friday night, we got absolutely destroyed. Some tour bus pulled in 10 minutes before closing, and I was running way behind on my cleaning. I was rushing, just wanting to get home. I was so focused I didn't even notice the time until I glanced at the clock and saw it was almost 1. The printer had been quiet. For a second, I felt this huge wave of relief. Maybe it finally stopped. I was wiping down the last steel counter when the sound ripped through the silence, making me flinch. I went over and tore off the ticket, expecting the usual. But this time, there was a second line printed underneath. The ticket said, "Black coffee, please hurry." My stomach went cold. That wasn't a random glitch. That was a response. It wasn't just a ghost in the machine repeating a mindless task. It was an order, and whatever had placed it knew I was late. It felt like a gentle, but very clear and very real complaint from an unseen, impatient customer. The next day, I took the handful of tickets I'd saved to Carol. I explained what had been happening, feeling completely ridiculous, but she didn't laugh or even look surprised. She just took the tickets and looked at them with a tired, sad expression. She told me the diner's original owner, her father, a man named Mr. Abernathy, had passed away from a heart attack in the back office late one night years ago. He was a creature of habit. Every single night after closing, he would have one last cup of black coffee while he reviewed the day's receipts. She said that ever since he died, the printer has done that for whoever closes. Most people quit after a few weeks. She told me not to worry about it, to just leave the ticket on the counter. She said it was best to just let him have his routine. After that, I always made sure there was a fresh, hot pot of coffee brewed right before I started cleaning. It just seemed like the polite thing to do.